Hello and welcome. I'm Ali Mustafa and this is Straight Talk. Turbulent times for Turkey after its currency, the Lira, hit a record low against the dollar this month. It has recovered a bit since, but the plunge, due in part to worsening US-Turkey ties, may have long-term effects. The Lira's rapid fall was linked to the latest row with the United States over detained pastor Andrew Brunson, which has resulted in sanctions against two Turkish ministers, as well as doubling of US tariffs on Turkish steel and aluminium. The evangelist pastor faces terrorism charges linked to the failed 2016 coup. Washington wants Ankara to release him immediately, but Turkey says it will proceed against Brunson according to its own law. And it has also hit back by imposing sanctions on US officials, as well as raising tariffs on some US products. And joining me now to discuss this further in the studio is Doğan Yilmaz. He's the Director for Business Development at Vintage Bullion DMCC. Hakan Ocal is the Assistant Professor at Ibn Khaldun University and a regular on the show as well. And from Washington, D.C., we're joined by Howard Beasy, who is President and CEO at the American-Turkish Council. Thank you for joining us, Howard. Let's begin with you, Doğan. We've seen a lot of volatility as far as the Lira is concerned. Even going into this weekend and next week, a lot of uncertainty is expected to prevail. What is actually happening with the currency?
Actually, that's $1 million question. A lot of people asking the same question, and we've been
not
discussing
a million lira question, but $1 million question.
Actually, there was a fire in the economy, in Turkish economy. The reason is, large current account deficit, and that's a result. Actually, it's not a cause. This low saving rate and the capital formation in Turkey causing this, and Turkey has been reliant on the foreign capital for a long time, and since 2010. It has been enjoying, cheap foreign currency funding. But what's going on in the current climate? U.S. interest rates are rising, and developed countries as well. We are going to be seeing the same thing in the ECB soon, probably, and that makes the FX inflows and the liquidity short, as well as expensive for the especially emerging countries like Turkey. And so what we are seeing is devaluation. But you would expect this devaluation to be a more orderly fashion. And unfortunately, strained relations with the US.
You mentioned that, so let's give a bit of context for our viewers. You talk about an organized devaluation or an imposed devaluation. In 2014, the Lira was a little over $2. But since then, partly owing, as you were mentioning, to a series of events including terror attacks, the failed July 2016 coup, and now relations with the United States, as they are, the currency has taken a hit. Hakan, I want to turn it to you. What is the thinking, the rationale in Ankara right now?
Ankara is, to say the least, is perplexed. They were never ever expecting the ally, the strategic ally in Washington would willingly, purposefully and intentionally trying to devaluate Turkish lira and sabotage the economy.
It's not that relations have been perfect between Turkey and the United States in the past year, 2 years, especially with the YPG in Syria. There are a lot of outstanding issues between the two, but this level of acrimony?
Regarding YPG, one outgoing Secretary of State and the new Secretary of State got together twice with our minister, and they have what they call road plan
and on
Manbij and the rest of Syria. Everything was going on its way, and all of a sudden, remember, there are elections in November 6 in the United States, and the Trump-Pence ticket is getting its strongest support from the religious groups. And here you have somebody presented as a captive priest or pastor, and you demand it with all your mighty force of the United States, and this tiny little country, it is not, they are not going to give this man to you, so you can show your force. You show everything. Because you have to prove yourself that you are a good Christian ticket to win the election. So you need support for.
So you think this has to do with domestic US politics? That's the perception in Ankara. Well, let's actually go to Washington, D.C. and the US, where we're joined by Howard Beasy. He's been involved with the Turkish-American community for quite some time. Howard, Turkey and the US have been NATO allies since the 1950s, where Ankara stood by Washington against the Soviet threat. But now Trump comes out and says that Turkey has been taking advantage of the U.S. for a long time. Has Turkey been taking advantage of the U.S.?
Well, as you point out, Turkey and the United States have been longtime allies, almost 70 years now of great cooperation, and that's really the foundation of our relationship has been mutual respect, cooperation, particularly in the strategic space. I agree with the two previous comments that much of this is about domestic in this country, and sort of a confluence in the case of Pastor Brunson, as it works its way through the Turkish courts, has been a catalyst here in Washington for a number of other grievances that some of which have been mentioned are challenging relationship over the YPG and others over the past few years. And so this has served as a catalyst to really get together multiple factions that are displeased with the current relationship and tone of the relationship.
Well, as you point out, Howard, I want to bring it in. I want to bring in this graphic for the benefit of our viewers on outstanding issues between Turkey and the United States. You mentioned the PKK, Fethullah Gulen, the suspected terror mastermind behind the July 2016 coup, lives in the United States. Turkey has been calling for his extradition, which the U.S. has denied on account of a lack of evidence. The PKK in Syria, the Halk Bank case, which was quite a turning point between the two as well. Then you have the purchase of S-400 Russian missile systems. The F-35 deal, of which Turkey was a part of, is on hold essentially. So all these issues piling on, reaching some sort of zenith with this point. Is it a point of no return in your opinion, Howard?
I don't think we're at a point of no return. It's troubling that we're at loggerheads over this current issue, because this really should be one of the easiest to solve, this case of the detained Pastor Brunson. So it doesn't bode well that we've got all these other things in line behind us. But let's be clear, this is about domestic politics here in the U.S. We do not, as the American Turkish Council representing business communities both here in the United States and in Turkey, we don't agree with the use of sanctions, economic sanctions, as it were, for political measures. We'd like to see the two sides get back to the negotiation table on this. And I think in some senses, if you look closely at some of the comments out of Ankara, there is still a door open there. And we're trying to encourage both sides to get back to the table on this.
Well, you guys agree that it's on politics. I'll bring it back to Hakk'a and bring it back to Turkey. Erdogan has come out and said that he feels betrayed. In fact, he said that you are a strategic partner, talking about the U.S., in NATO, and on the other hand, you stab your ally in the back. Is this acceptable? Is it acceptable?
It is not. I mean, no sane politician in Turkey would accept such a language in front. I mean, you can say such things, whatever you want to, behind the closed doors, but when you are strategically ally with a country, you can say such things, taking advantage of United States. He is putting Turkey in a very bad light right now, and we are not, as David mentioned, in the point of no return, but Trump is pushing us real fast to that point. He should be careful. I mean, yes, today's, he has daily tweets, you know, in his pajamas. In his latest, he said, cut off Turkey. This is a very round word. I mean, you cut off the extra branches of a tree or something. He didn't say cutting out Turkey or something. He's playing with words. I mean, this is not sounding good to Turkish ears.
The US president might be playing with words. I want to take it back to Howard in DC. Howard, recently we saw a Turkish delegation go to the United States to meet officials in DC and return with little or nothing to show for it. There were also reports, rumors in fact, that there was a deal or almost a deal to get Pastor Brunson, returned back to the United States, which didn't materialize. What needs to happen to normalize US-Turkey relations moving forward?
You're correct. There has been a number of channels of communication, so we think that's encouraging, of course. But I think you're right in that your assessment of both sides came together. And let's be clear, both sides feel like they have legitimate grievance right now. And the past few years, we've experienced a tremendous amount of trust deficit between the two sides over things like YPG, the failed coup attempt, these kinds of things. And both sides, both governments need to own some of the responsibility for that, I think. It's our opinion that the only way this is going to get solved is through concerted dialogue. And to be frank, I think that these two very strong leaders need to come back together on this and figure out how we chart a better path forward. Because it's unconscionable to think that the United States and Turkey are not going to continue to be strong allies in the future. There's too much at stake, and any casual observer of this relationship knows that there is much more that pushes us together than pulls us apart.
On that note, thank you for joining us, Howard BZ from Washington. We will continue our discussion and we'll talk about the way forward. But interestingly, these past couple of weeks have also given clarity to both American and Turkish positions and shown them who stands where and who stands with whom. In fact, Turkey now might be in a position to search for new allies, as Ömer Kablan reports.
And to President Erdogan and the Turkish government, I have a message on behalf of the President of the United States of America. Release Pastor Andrew Brunson now, or be prepared to face the consequences.
Tehdit ediyor ya. Saat 18'e kadar yarın akşam göndereceksiniz. Burası çatladı kapı ülkesi mi ya? Burası Türkiye, Türkiye. Ne yapıyorsunuz? Ne yapıyorsunuz?
The Turkish president is showing no signs of backing down in a standoff with the US. And the Turkish currency has lost more than a quarter of its value against the US dollar in only 2 weeks. Turkey has called this an economic war, and many have stood in support. German Chancellor Angela Merkel said it's in our country's interest to see Turkey prosper. With a $140 billion trade volume between Turkey and the European Union, European banks sitting on loans to Turkey have already seen their share prices slide. Russia says it will ease visa requirements for Turks and has promised 6 million Russian tourists to visit Turkey in the next year to help the flow of foreign capital. Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif said Trump's jubilation in inflicting economic hardship on its NATO ally Turkey is shameful. And in a recent visit, Qatar's Emir announced a $15 billion investment in Turkey. And meanwhile in Istanbul, some Iraqi university students came together to exchange their dollars for the local currency.
We believe that this blockade, this crisis, this economic attack against the Turkish lira is because what Turkey did for us. Turkey always was supporting us in our issues, was supporting Arabs, was supporting Iraqis. So we came here to show the support for them.
And locals too are supporting the economy by not holding back on their spending. As Turkey continues to take measures to contain a currency crisis, here in Istanbul, the fast-changing exchange rate has hurt local shop owners. But many are hopeful that the Turkish economy will bounce back. Reşat Yılmaz runs a small jewelry store in Istanbul. Lately, he's constantly been on the phone to get the latest on the exchange rates.
Well-intentioned Turkish citizens are selling off their gold and jewelry and exchanging the foreign currencies, but small shop owners don't have enough cash money at the moment. But there's no need to panic, because it seems like banks will now provide more liquidity.
Furkan Ünal is the chief financial officer for one of Turkey's largest steel manufacturers. After the US president imposed tariffs on Turkish steel, he says Turkey may now look for new trade partners.
US is a good market, but Turkish entrepreneurs and Turkish businessmen have capability to find new markets, including the Africa, including the Southeast, including maybe to increase their exports to GCC countries.
And just as Turkey's business world is looking for new trade partners, Turkey may well end up looking for new political allies. Ömer Kablan, Straight Talk.
Ömer Kablan reporting there. And we have Hakka Ojal in the studio. We've got Doğan Yılmaz in the studio. And joining us now to get a perspective from Europe is Laura Patala-Adam. She's the Secretary General at the European Parliament Turkey Forum, and she joins us from Spain. Thank you so much for joining our panel today, Laura. Now, your organization, the European Parliament Turkey Forum, has issued a statement condemning US tariffs on Turkey, and it reads that the EU considers these tariffs based on national security concerns as illegitimate and against WTO rules. And economic destabilization of Turkey is in no one's interest. Does your organization believe that Turkey's economy is being destabilized, Laura?
Well, it does. The tariffs that the U.S. administration has been putting on Turkey have clearly destabilized the economy. But at the same time, it's true that it's not only Trump's fault, the decline in the Turkish economy. As it was explained by the previous panelists, we have been seeing a recession in the economy, and the sanctions are only putting to that, and the imposition of tariffs. So we are seeing how Trump is taking advantage of the fragile state of the Turkish economy by putting pressure on political issues.
What can Europe do? Relations between Turkey and Europe haven't been ideal, to say the least, in the past 2 years. Is there a role, a constructive, positive role that Europe can play?
Well, we have been witnessing a normalization of relations since Varna summit in Bulgaria in the past few months ago. And we have been seeing now some EU member states have been sending messages of support to Turkey in this new economic role with the United States. And we've seen normalization steps with the Netherlands, for example. Now the diplomatic relations have been reinstated since last month. In Germany, for example, we have also seen a relaxation of the travel advisory ban to Turkey, and as well how it has been lifting the business restrictions in the country. Now Turkey and Germany will be meeting at the end of September, and on the agenda there's not only discussing bilateral issues but also reviewing the accession talks. So we see in a way that there's a rapprochement between the two sides because the US, it's not only this trade war, it's not only against Turkey, it's against many other partners around the world, including the European Union as well. So this is not only affecting US-Turkey relations, but also the transatlantic relation at large.
I want to get Doğan Yılmaz into the conversation. Laura, stay with us. Doğan, Europe, economically essential for Turkey.
Yes.
Is there a way forward then with the US now targeting Turkey and EU with selective tariffs?
Well, I totally agree with Laura in terms of when President Trump said Turkey has been taking advantage of US. It's totally the opposite way right now. Like Laura said, the President Trump has been taking advantage of a vulnerable state of Turkish economy right now. This is not a friendly approach at all. But we have seen this from the President Trump towards China, Russia, and European Union. He's playing to his own constituency, of course, like President Erdogan also. And Turkey has to find alternatives. And Turkey has been looking for alternatives and finding those alternatives in the, in the past.
Turkey has to find alternatives, but what is the expectation in Ankara, Hakka? As far as these alternatives are concerned, Russia is looking towards China. They're talking about a single currency. We'll get to that as well, or an alternative currency to the dollar. But what is the expectation from Europe?
As Doğan says, I mean, alternatives only in terms of economic relations should be not right. You have to find, there are a couple of mistakes or wrong posture of Turkish economy, to say the least. First of all, now we notice that most of the Turkish exports are somewhat depending on the imports. So Turkey has to find new ways to make 100% national domestic exports. And also they need to find markets.
As far as Turkey has been saying, it wants visa-free travel, it wants more access to the European market, things that Europe and European leaders, the EU, hasn't necessarily agreed to. Laura, can we expect any sort of rapprochement as far as visa-free travel, something that Turkey has been pushing for a few years now?
Well, the Foreign Affairs Minister Çavuşoğlu yesterday announced that there will be a renewed momentum when it comes to the visa liberalization talks. At the same time, the Council in the June conclusions said that EU accession talks are at the moment at a standstill and that no further work is expected for the modernization of the customs union. The thing is that now we see a new opportunity. There should be new engagement from both sides, and I think both sides are ready to sit down and start this dialogue. There's a major standing block when it comes to visa liberalization talks, which is the anti-terror law. Turkey submitted already a new positioning when it comes to this law, and the European Commission is at the moment examining this. So not everything is lost. I think we might see a change in direction after the meeting with Germany, which holds back the modernization of the customs union at the moment. But now the relations bilaterally are improving. Visa liberalization talks might also advance if the European Union side sees some improvement from Turkey's side. But one thing needs to be said as well. This is the position of the Council. The European Parliament has a different one, and a new report might be coming in the coming months. And if we take into account the position from the European Parliament's resolution last year, we might be seeing a renewed call for suspending talks because the European Parliament considers that the new presidential system does not respect some of the rule of law and separation of powers. So this might also be getting a lot of attention in the coming months.
Well, that's what Europe has been saying for some time, and Turkey has countered that assertion by saying that this is a democratic process. These reforms, constitutional changes were part of a referendum, a democratic referendum in this country, but European leaders, of course, have voiced their concerns and opposition to this. Bringing it back, I want to turn your attention to Sergei Lavrov. The foreign minister of Russia was in Turkey recently, and he said that as the dollar is the main, well, he said that we should look for using our own currencies when it comes to international trade. But the dollar is a reserve currency globally. Is this a feasible suggestion?
Well, that's unfortunate. Many countries, especially emerging countries, and Turkey, China, and Russia have been trying to just impose this and using, especially Iran too. When you look at the country under embargo for so long time, and Turkey is just a neighbor. And there is no other logic than just exchanging goods in between countries or using the same the local currencies. But unfortunately this hasn't happened because you can see that the commodities in the world are traded in US dollars and gold and others. So
basically the US can get away with.
Yes, this is going to take some time, but the countries, emerging countries and other countries, developed countries also, even ECB has been pushing hard on euro since its inception, But unfortunately, it hasn't happened. Only, I think 1 or 2% of the, total trade in the world is done by, transacted over euro at the moment. And 90-some% of the, world trade is still in US dollar terms.
Thank you so much, Doğan Yilmaz, Hakan Hocal, and Laura Batawa Adam, who joined us from Spain. And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Ali Mustafa. If you have any comments or suggestions, do share them with us on Twitter with the hashtag Straight Talk. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, take care and goodbye.